Good evening to everyone. Welcome to one of the three last sessions of today's conference. We're just waiting for a few people to join us. A few more people to join in, then we should be able to commence in the next 5 minutes or so. But welcome and thank you for making it for this session. I know it's towards the end of the day, and we are ready to wrap up. So we hope we will be able to hold your attention for at least 60 minutes or less. Yeah, okay. All right, so as we wait for all the other participants who are intended to join us this evening, allow me to introduce myself. Let me just allow you to see my face. Good evening to everyone once again. Welcome to one of the last sessions for the 2020 Africa Internet Governance Forum. The main topic that we'll be handling today is privacy policies and practice for children in the digital era. My name is Florence Anyango Ogonjo. I am a research assistant at the Center for Intellectual Property and Information Technology Law in Nairobi, Kenya, housed under Strathmore University. So today, as we discuss this topic, we will have 3 speakers. I will be your moderator. So all my speakers are present. So the first we will have Cynthia Nzuki, who is also a research assistant at the Center for Intellectual Property and Information Technology Law. It's a mouthful, so we just call it CIPIT. Then we'll have Francis Monyango. He's a research fellow at the Center for Intellectual Property as well. Then we have Rachel Lachane, who's also a research assistant at CIPIT. So welcome to all of you once again. The main reason why we chose this specific topic is because at CIPIT, we have a data governance center that deals with data protection and privacy rights on a wide scale, or rather on a large scale. But this specific topic focuses on children. There's been a lot of generalized talk on privacy policies and privacy laws and data protection laws that generally relate to the larger population and on a general landscape. However, there's been very minimal focus on how this impacts and is likely to affect children, particularly as we continuously move towards children adopting things within the digital era through school, the use of the internet and other things, and through the gadgets that they use to enhance their education. So it's something that is quite relevant and timely, especially for the African continent. You'll note that throughout this presentation, there are other countries that are quite ahead with respect to privacy policies in relation to children, with respect to how they use the internet, how they use the respective devices that they have, whether it be at home or in school or just in a public setting. So this session and this specific conversation is specifically structured to discuss mapping of internet access and digital use for children in Africa. This will be done by Cynthia. Then we will look at the landscape of privacy laws, which specifically relate to children's privacy. Francis Monyango will handle that. Then we will have a look at the risks to children's rights to privacy. That will be handled by Rachel, who will also be handling policy recommendations that we will make in this respect. So this entire discussion is going to be contextualized within the African continent. So it will look at, the mapping will look at the African continent specifically. So will the landscape, so will the risks. The risks might be generalized, but they will be very specific towards the challenges that are being faced within the continent. So will the policy recommendations, as they will be guided and directed to regional blocks, to institutional organizations within the regions, and also to national policy makers. So without further ado, Cynthia, please start us off with the mapping of internet access and digital use for children in Africa.
Okay, thank you so very much, Florence. As introduced, my name is Cynthia Nzuki. I am a research assistant at the Center for Intellectual Property and Information Technology. I will be taking us through just giving us some statistics on internet access amongst children between the ages of 3 to 17 years within Africa. So the digitization of our society has made ICT skills and access to technology very important. And I'm sure most of us can agree with that statement. A good example demonstrating this importance is how the COVID-19 pandemic caused one of the largest mass disruptions in education in history and worsened the global learning crisis. According to UNICEF, in April of 2020, more than 190 countries instituted national school closures, putting up to 1.6 billion students at risk of falling behind at great costs to their education and to their future. With many jurisdictions, the ministries of education deployed different remote learning policies, and education stakeholders were inspired to reimagine education by harnessing technology to close the persisting gaps in access to education. This was evidenced by how most schools adopted online learning platforms and how most institutions went the route of e-learning in order to enable students to continue on with their education. It is therefore undeniable that there has been an increase in internet access in the world over. And I would argue that COVID-19 really, the pandemic really propelled this growth and this increase in internet access, especially amongst our children, given that most of them had to continue on with their learning online. So keen to today's topic of discussion and keen to what I will be presenting on. UNICEF holds that at the global level, it is estimated that one child in three, so one amongst three children is an internet user, and that one in three internet users is a child under 18 years of age. Additionally, still borrowing from UNICEF and from the report on how many children and young people have internet access at home, they highlight that globally, 33% of school-going children between the ages of 3 and 17 years have internet access at home. And regionally, looking at Africa, specific in Eastern and Southern Africa, only 12% of school-going children have access, while looking at the Middle East and North Africa, 5% of school-going children between the ages of 3 and 17 have access to internet at home. Looking at West and Central Africa, 5% of school-going children have internet access at home. So these statistics only go to show us how, yes, children within our region, within Africa specifically, do have access to internet. And therefore, there is a need and there's an importance to consider the topic that we are discussing today. Translating these percentages to numbers, in Eastern and Southern Africa, on the graph being shown right now, I'd ask us to look specifically at the yellow graphs, because those are what we are considering today. These graphs have been sourced and obtained from that report that I have mentioned from UNICEF on how many children and young people have access to internet. So translating these percentages to numbers, in Eastern and Southern Africa, that percentage roughly translates to 26 million school-going children, while in Middle East and Northern Africa, that percentage translates to 30 million school-going children, and while in West and Central Africa, that number translates to 10 million school-going children. So these numbers in and of themselves show us and demonstrate to us how indeed our children between the ages of 3 and 17 years old do have access to internet. So children's access to the internet has multiple advantages that include information access, opportunities of self-expression, expanding the horizons of awareness, and vastly also expanding their scope of social interaction. However, it also exposes children to risks, including exploitation and abuse by adult users and cyberbullying by peers. These risks raise concerns as to whether children are aware or if they're able to freely exercise their right to privacy in this digital age. Therefore, with that being said, I would like to invite my colleague to speak to us on the landscape of children's privacy and why it is important and why we do need policy to protect our children online.
Thank you very much for that. Good introduction. I'll take you through the landscape of privacy laws and children's privacy within the continent. So, as my colleague has just said, COVID kind of accelerated the use of internet, especially for school-going children within the continent, and so many children are now can now access the internet, and that we can say somehow poses a risk, because you really can't police what they're doing online unless you put protections, and And in most cases, such protections are not even there, or the guardians are not even aware of such. However, the law has, since time immemorial, has been considerate of children's plight and the need for privacy, and this can be seen in the Africa Union Agenda for Children 2040, which forces an idea of Africa fit for children, and it calls upon states to provide universal access to affordable information and technology devices, content, and connectivity. And these need to be integrated into the teaching and learning for the children. The United Nations Committee for the Rights of the Children, the CRC Committee, has affirmed this position in General Comment 25, noting that children's rights shall be respected, protected, and fulfilled in the digital environment. So from those two, you can actually see the acknowledgement that today's children are living in a digital world, and they need to be protected while accessing the digital world. The South African Constitutional Court, in the case of the Center for Child Law and Others versus Media 24, held that the right to privacy is even more pressing when dealing with children, as it is central to a child's self-identity, which is still forming, emphasizing that the protection of privacy among young persons fosters respect for dignity, personal integrity, and autonomy. Now, if we can look at international law, we have the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Children, the UNCRC, which came into force in 1989. And according to Article 16, it states of the UNCRC, it states that no child shall be subjected to arbitrary or unlawful interference with his or her privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to unlawful attacks on his or her honor and reputation. This convention was adopted way back in 1989, before the internet, the use of internet became widespread like it is right now. And if you look at continentally, I will make a slight mention of our neighbors up north in Europe, who have the general data protection regulations, which merits like specific protection with regard to child personal data, and it has a limit. It has a specific protections for children's data. In the Africa Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Children, Article 10, it states that no child shall be subject to arbitrary or unlawful interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence. You can see a similarity with the UNCRC. And the child has a right to protection of the law against such interference and attacks. So across Africa, we can see there are over 32 countries that have adopted data protection laws, but not all of them provide explicit protections for children. Notably, the Africa Union Convention on Cyber Security and Personal Data Protection is silent on the processing of personal information on children. Regionally, the Economic Community of West Africa States, ECOWAS, is the only sub-regional body with a binding regional data protection regimen. And the Supplementary Act on Personal Data Protection aims to ensure that all member states establish a legal framework for protection of privacy of data relating to the people within the ECOWAS region. However, it has no detailed guidance on processing of personal information relating to children. Now I'll go to nationally. Nationally, the Data Protection Act of Ghana and the POPIA, the South Africa Data Protection, the Personal Information Act of 2013, both prohibit the processing of personal information of children unless one of the exemptions, such as consent of the parents or guardian, can be established. The Data Protection Act of Kenya 2019 provides that children's data cannot be processed unless consent is given by the child's parent or guardian, and the processing is in a manner that protects them and advances their rights and the best interest of the child. The aspect of best interest of a child is a key thing in the Kenyan Constitution in Article 53, and you can see it being replicated in the Data Protection Act 2019. In the Zimbabwe Data Protection Act, which was enacted last year in 2021, it provides that personal information of a child may not be processed unless a competent person consents to the processing of such data. Now, Nigeria, in its Section 7 of its Constitution and Section 8 of the Child Rights Act, provides for the child's right to privacy. Need to also note that the Children's Act in Kenya provides for the child's right to privacy. And further, Section 23 of the Cybercrimes Act 2015, the Nigeria Cybercrimes Act 2015, punishes child pornography, and the Cybercrimes Prohibition and Prevention Act criminalizes cyberbullying, cyberstalking, and all the activities that could affect children. But it doesn't have any specific guidelines or provisions on the privacy of a Nigerian child.
Setting for us the tone on what the legal landscape looks like. Thank you, Cynthia, as well, for setting for us the tone on the foundational just statistics on what the internet penetration and internet use looks like for children within the continent. Having said that, they have really set down a foundation that it is important, in as much as all these generalized laws are being created, to create better foundational base that specifically caters for the child. The reason for this will be primarily handled by Rachel, who will be discussing the risks that are associated with internet use and just digital transformation across the continent that puts children at risk, and a more concrete reason as to why these specific privacy policies and rules that relate to children are required. With that, also, it's important to also note the fact that in Kenya, the president recently signed the new Children's Act, which also makes provision for a necessity for the protection of privacy of children. So which is something that's quite beneficial and big, which of course is supplemented by all other existing laws that relate to data protection. So that's the Data Protection Act. That's also the Cybercrimes Act. It applies across the board. However, there's a very keen necessity to look into what children are doing within the digital age, especially with the continued use of the internet. This is, of course, not limiting it to the fact that internet use is still more localized within urban areas and less rural areas. So the laws that are being set right now are not being made in exclusion of the category of children who also exist in those areas, because there are various initiatives across different countries that champion the use of digital transformation, especially with respect to the education, as well as internet penetration in those areas, more especially for vulnerable communities. So in that regard, I'll hand it over to Rachel to take us through the risks that are associated with internet use, especially for children. And also in that regard, I'd like to really encourage the participants to, if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to make, you could put those in the chat and we will get to them and have a more in-depth discussion about them once all the entire presentation is done. So Rachel, we can move to the next section where we talk about the risks that are associated with internet use in children.
Thank you, Florence. So according to a UNICEF report, it was observed that both children and adults face greater risks of intrusion into their rights to privacy when online. So how this happens is that, one, there may be digital footprints, two, private sector actors may collect and monetize children's data, and three, parents and guardians may publish children's information or images. So there are certain complexities that exist within the space of children's rights to privacy. And in its very nature, it is multifaceted. So that means it touches on the physical, it touches on the communication, information, and decisional aspects such as consent. So when it comes to physical privacy, technologies affect children through apps that maybe track, monitor, and just broadcast children's life, images and behaviors and locations. And sometimes when it comes to communications, this happens when there are posts or chats that are either intercepted by businesses or organizations or just things of the sort. And then when it comes to decisional privacy, this may be affected by measures that restrict access to beneficial information, which inhibits children's ability to make independent decisions in line with their developing capacities. So how the child's privacy may be compromised, maybe through the processing of personal data. So this happens when maybe public institutions, businesses, organizations, the apps that they use, the platforms that they use are processing their data to such an extent that it may invade on the sensitive and personal information. And in the event that any of these platforms are hacked, what happens is that the children's data is compromised and there may be identity theft. So this then begs the question, like, what kind of safeguards have been put in place to protect children's data? Are they different from those that have been put in place for adults? And then secondly, there is online surveillance. So this is in light with some of the apps and some of the platforms that kids use just have permissions. And children being children may accept everything. And this may include like the microphone, the camera, the location. And through this, the images, the behavior, and the locations may be monitored, which poses a risk to the physical privacy, to the communication privacy, and to, again, the decisional privacy. And then there is also the creation and maintenance of records of a child's entire digital existence. So one of this, probably sure you've seen this like on Instagram, where a celeb creates an account for their child and then they go on to comment as if they're the child. Then they share photos, they share like so much information, and you can only think like, would the child approve of this? Would the child want this kind of information to be shared about them to people who know nothing about them? And this can also be seen like when caregivers, family members, peers, educators, or even just strangers go on to share information. So what that does is that it creates a digital footprint for the kids, like the personal information. It can be found like on websites, on social media posts, social media interactions, and the like. And then when you actually think like when kids are using educational platforms, like when they're on YouTube, the videos that they click on, the ads that pop up, the games that they download, and the e-learning platforms that they use, it just begs the question, like, is it possible to erase the child's digital footprint, given that it is tracked throughout their whole lifetime? Do they have the capacity to say, I would like this data about me erased or something of the sort? And then lastly, there is the use of biometrics. So how this comes about is like, I'll just give an example of Huduma number in Kenya, like when we were required to have ID cards or that link every government services, and they were using biometrics to do that. So assuming they collected children's biometrics and that kind of thing, it would be an invasion to their privacy, mostly because one, it is sensitive personal information, and two, it is data that cannot really be deleted. And considering there are changes like throughout their lifetime, is it really necessary? So some of the pre-existing risks include online stalking and harassment. This mainly comes about like the internet is a good place when you use it in a good way, but for children, there is need for parents and guardians to monitor them. So sometimes there are instances where children have been attacked, children have been bullied for one reason or the other, and you find that maybe it's their classmates, their schoolmates, or just kids doing that kind of thing. And mostly when it comes to stalking, it comes about in the instance where an adult starts grooming a child and just starts talking to them and all that, and yeah, starts stalking them even in the outside the digital space. And then there is also on the online advertising market, like I had mentioned earlier, the ads that pop up when the child is on an e-learning platform or on YouTube or just using the internet for whatever purpose. So when this happens, it causes a risk to their privacy because they might end up inputting information that is too sensitive or too personal, such that they can even be identified as the outside the digital space. And lastly, there is exposure to unwanted, inappropriate content, such as pornography. So in some of these cases, these risks can severely harm the children's mental and emotional and physical well-being, which will limit their potential for self-development during childhood, adolescence, and even into adulthood. So some of the policy recommendations are that there is a multi-stakeholder approach to children's rights to privacy. So think of children as the primary stakeholders. Like if this was a circle, children would be at the very middle, at the very core. And what that means is that states, non-state actors, regulators, the civil society are part of the decision-making process. So one of the policies that was mentioned was the African Children's Charter, and it makes it clear that the promotion and protection of the rights and welfare of the child is the duty of everyone. And this is one of the things that we could actually consider, like when developers are making apps, when these videos are being put out there, are they child friendly? Do they take into consideration the children's rights to privacy and that kind of thing? What kind of information are they collecting about children? And then secondly, there is the adoption and implementation of child-sensitive legal frameworks that provide adequate protection for children's privacy rights. So think about privacy by design standard, like these platforms, this videos, this apps that children are using, are they designed in such a way that they protect children's rights to privacy? And then how differently is the children data processed and handled, and to what extent should they retain this information even when it's collected, even when it's managed? And then this also covers the issue of consent. Is it possible for a child, it shouldn't be possible though, for a child to consent to information about them to be collected? Is this how can parents and guardians play a role in ensuring that they consent to this kind of processing and this kind of management of data? And then thirdly, there is the adoption of child-centered policies that comply with the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child and other international law recommendations on the right to privacy. My colleague Francis spoke about the GDPR. So that's one of the international law recommendations that we could look at, but not really to mimic it or just to copy paste it, but really to think, what does it mean when you talk about privacy, about children? What does this mean in the African context? And how can you apply it where we are at? And lastly, it is there's need to develop guidelines on children's rights in the digital era, including the right to privacy in Africa, and to clearly define the roles and responsibilities of the state, of parents and guardians and private sector actors. So this, I think, goes back to the multi-stakeholder approach, which basically means that each and every person should be involved. Yes, that will be all. Over to you, Florence.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for summing up a bit about the risks that are associated with the use of the internet and how children use it and what they're likely to be exposed to, as well as defining for us the policy recommendations, especially touching on the fact that there requires to be a multi-stakeholder approach in coming up with the relevant policies and regulations that would properly govern and properly protect the child's right to privacy in this context. So I would like to throw it back a little bit to the audience that we have here. Does anyone, based on the presentation that we've just given and the brief breakdown that we've given from statistics to legislative mapping to the risks associated to the policy recommendations, just to throw it to the participants that we have in the audience that we have here, do any of you have any maybe questions that you'd have or comments with regards to the conversation that we're having today? Just feel free to raise your hand and we will unmute you. Marianne, please go ahead.
Hello, thank you so much for convening this and for the comprehensive presentations on the data and privacy landscape. My name is Mariana Munyendo. I am the founder of Missing Child Kenya, an organization that does tracing of missing children. And our biggest platform is the online platform, where we depend on biodata of children to put out information. And so mine is just a comment about being happy that this space is being created so that we can be able to plug in, because we have a lot of challenges from both ends, from the public and from the parents themselves, and even us as an institution. What data do you put out? What data do you keep private? And even so, even if you put out details about a missing child, the public treat it in a manner that sometimes you have no control over. They get into extended stories, which now go back into some of those repercussions that these children and their families face as a long-term effect. One of the few things we've started doing is not giving case file. Once a child has been found, we don't say the issue around it. But it's just an interesting space that we need to educate more people about it, that once a child is on the online space because they were missing, some of this data needs to be contained, because this ends up being a testimony of theirs even 10 years later, and how that story is created really impacts the best interests of that child. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marianne, for bringing that up. I don't think that most people consider, really sit down and consider that what are the repercussions of having children online, especially if they're lost. We really rely on social media, especially, to try and find them. And once they're found, I don't think there's an afterthought of what other repercussions go into their digital footprint still being out there. So thank you so much for bringing that up. Marcel, you can go next.
Okay. Good morning. I'm really pleased to attend this session. I think I found it yesterday on Twitter. I just say, okay, I'll book it. I'm really interested on children privacy and protection. So I work in Cameroon, where we are doing something similar to Mariana. So first of all, thank you to the panel for those information. But my question is directly to Mariana, because I feel as we are doing the same thing. I just wanted to know, Mariana, when you talk about missing child, on the Cameroon side, when you say missing, you can get the authorities just get crazy. So are we talking about missing like kidnapped, or missing he hasn't shown up after 1 or 2 days? Do you have like a legislation that comment dire encadré? Sorry, I'm a French speaker, so that help you to define when a child is missing? Because is it that after 1 day, after 2 hours, or just he hasn't shown up? Because sometimes a child just don't show up for like hours. So how do you navigate that area? Thank you.
Marcel, thank you. I'd be more than happy to share some more comprehensive information after this. But we are lucky that for Kenya, we are in the space that we have recently been looking at our laws surrounding children, and our children's bill was recently passed, which has a lot of updates on what we consider a child in need of care and protection to be, and that is a missing child. So some of the things that we have been doing, even as best practice, while we are pushing for legislation to come through, was we do not wait for 24 or 48 hours. A missing child is an immediate issue. A lot of there's so many definitions of who a child or who a missing child is. It could be missing from home, kidnapped, lost and found, missing from institutions of care. So we have listed all those different scenarios that help us in unpacking who a missing child is, because even globally, I will refer you to International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There's no one definition of who a missing child is. So it's a group of definitions, and I'd be more than happy to share more information after this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marianne and Marcel, for this also very insightful topic, which is also insightful to us as researchers, because it also sort of rounds up and expands what we look at in terms of research. So Joy, I see your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Very good presentation, I must say, and of course asking whether we'll get the presentation, but also to chime in on what Mariana presented, or rather asked. For me, how I always consider it, it's a thin balance between privacy, data protection, but where I always put the line, or rather my guiding principle is the best interest of a child. When the information is out there for purposes of protection, for me, it's not so much of a concern as compared to when the information is there for exploitative or abusive purposes. So good job, Mariana. And yeah, maybe I was just chiming in, not really asking a question.
Thank you so much for your comment, Joy. Really appreciate it, and I'm sure it's been a learning session on how different aspects of children's rights with respect to privacy and the use of the internet intersect with each other. Francis had a response for Mariana as well. You can go ahead.
It wasn't really a response. It was to contribute to what she talked about. In Kenya, when the Data Protection Act was being enacted in 2019, I remember one of the discussions was about exemptions, and the public interest was an issue. So when the issue of like a missing child was an example that the drafters used to show a case of public interest, like it's in the interest of us to find this missing child. That's why we're going to share the information, their image, and put in the contacts of, let's say, the local police or the chief or the provincial administrator, so that it may help in finding the child. So it's an exemption that is there, that is recognized in the Data Protection Act. And I agree. It can, as Joy has just said, there's an aspect of, at the end of the day, it's the best interest of the child, and that's one thing that has been very clear in the Kenyan Constitution, that whatever is being done has to be in the best interest of the child. So when you look at put the best interest of the child, which is in the Constitution, public interest, which is an exemption in the Data Protection Act, you understand where now, at some point, one may be forced to engage in activities that are not so privacy-centric, in quotes.
And thank you so much for that, Francis. Do any of the other, do you have any other participants who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Marianne has shared her details on the chat. If you would like to get in touch with her, just to further know what she's doing, or just get in touch with the work that she's doing in that respect, please feel free to do so, because in as much as this is an online platform and just a presentation by us, it's also a good networking session for you guys to be able to know what different people in different parts of the continent are doing as well. I can see we don't have any other questions. So as we try and wrap up, because it's I think it's the end of the day for most people, and for those of you who it's still morning, well, good morning and grand rising to you. So just as we wrap up, what I'd like to ask our speakers who have just spoken is a question around the fact that within the African continent, there's already a lot of data protection laws that are being created. They're not necessarily specific to the rights to privacy of the child, but within those existing laws, somebody would say, I would like to think that since the data protection laws already exist, we also have the cybersecurity laws that exist. They cover a big part of most of the risks that have been mentioned and most of the risks that are associated with the rights to privacy of children. One would sometimes think that, okay, wait, maybe those policies are already sufficient as they exist, and maybe trying to create other policies would just be creating an influx of policies. So what would you say about trying to ensure that there are very, very specific privacy laws that exist for children specifically, and very specific and clear protocols that also exist with respect to trying to preserve the right to privacy of the child, especially with the digital era, and especially as technology keeps evolving. And we'll all eventually transition to a place where we all have digital footprints, and some children may not necessarily have the right to accept, to say, yes, I accept to have a digital footprint, and some will not have the right to say, I don't accept a digital footprint. So what would you say to someone who says that maybe the laws are sufficient, we really don't need any more specific laws with regards to the rights to privacy for a child? Any of the speakers can go first.
I could go first. There is need for children-specific legislation, and this is because when you look at the kind of data that would ideally be collected from an adult, it's not the same as data or information that would be collected from a child. And also taking into consideration the fact that children are growing up with this. So we need to think like way before they are born. You find like, what are they called? Like scans on everything about them. So these are children who will be growing into this. With adults, it's different. We have found it, or it has found us. Yeah, technology has found us. So with children, there is need to just consider like, what will their future look like? What are the implications that will be there when their privacy has been compromised? Their privacy and security has been compromised, and these are some of the things that adults wouldn't necessarily. Yes, they will look into it, but it wouldn't hold as much water as it does with children. So I think there's need for children-specific guidelines, and also with a lot of platforms up and everything. So kids use the internet space for entertainment, for play, and for fun. For play and for education, fun and education. So we also need to consider like our developers developing, like, is there a privacy by design that is specific to children? Is there a way that they can be protected from things such as pornography, things such as advertising, online advertising and all that? And also, there is the fact that they actually are not aware of all this. Like even when they consent to things and the like, they cannot really tell that they are consenting to things or what the implications would be. So that's why I think there's need for children-specific guidelines on privacy.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Cynthia Francis, you can go next.
The point that I had to share was exactly that which Rachel has pointed out on awareness. When children are engaging on these platforms and when they are actively participating on these platforms, they really don't take the time to look into or read into the terms or policies that are usually presented by the developers. As such, there is a need to create specific policies that target children, as their needs are different on these platforms and that their uses are different on these platforms. In addition to this, there's also a need to ensure that these policies are either simplified, or when developers are indeed developing these platforms that are maybe specific to children, that they should consider making it simple, making these terms as simple to understand in order for children to be able to either go through this information and know what it is that they're getting themselves into. But this is just adding on to Rachel's point.
I'd like to try to answer the question by Mariana on the issue of coding and child creators. Copyright is okay. Like in Kenya, we can see copyright is territorial. It's registered under Kikobo, and I'm not so sure whether a child can hold the rights, but I believe they can hold the rights. It can be held for them in trust by a guardian or an adult until they reach age of majority. But if they create anything, I don't think it can be taken away from them. I hope that answers.
Thank you so much, Francis, for taking up that response. So as we completely wrap up, Marcel, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think Rachel and I just forgot her name said it all. We really need a privacy right for children. We really, as we have human rights, we have children right. We should also have those rights, specific rights for children when in regards of the data privacy. And also, apart from that, specific to Africa, we need to have strong institution, because at the end, we saw that we can see that we have laws, we have recommendation and so on. But when we go on the field, those laws are not even known, not respect, or there's no way to make it happen. So we need to make those laws to make it really happen in the society, as those children are tomorrow adults. So it's really important if we want to have like a better future for our children. I think that's definitely not only the laws, but have strong institution and make the laws happen in everyday life, like what's happening with the laws on cigarettes and so on. That's my point. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your contribution, and I really do appreciate the fact that you managed to make it for this session, because together with Marianne, you've given us quite a lot to think about. So as we wrap up this session for the day, I'd like to just say a very big thank you to the participants for being able to make it to this session. It has been a pleasure having you. I know it's in the evening. I know it's time to wrap up for most of us, and I really do appreciate the fact that you managed to make it for it. There's a couple of people who've asked for the slides. Before we wrap up completely, you could please share your respective emails in the chat section, and we'll be able to forward you the slides for this specific presentation. Alongside with that, at CIPIT, we will be carrying out a more in-depth research with respect to this topic, for which the output will be a report. So be on the lookout for that and we will be very glad for you to get your inputs once you will be able to also see the report and have access to the report. And I'm hoping it will still continue to be insightful to whatever work you're doing, and to inform the need for the protection of the right to privacy for children, and the need to specifically enforce the right to privacy, especially with the growth in internet use and the digital transformation that's happening within the continent. So thank you to everyone, and also thank you to our host for the Africa IGF for 2020 for hosting us and allowing us to have this very insightful session. Thank you so much. Please leave your emails before you leave the chat. Yes. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.